Have you been posting carousel posts on Instagram, or have you noticed that lots more people seem to be doing this at the moment? Now, there is a reason for this. It's because carousel posts on Instagram generate considerably more engagement than video and image posts. Want to find out more about this? In this week's episode, I share 4 ways to repurpose your content into an Instagram carousel post.
Welcome to the Content 10X Podcast, the show where content creators learn how to harness the power of content repurposing. And now, your host, Amy Woods.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Content 10X Podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and I have been experimenting with Instagram carousels for the last few months or so with our content at Content 10X and also with our clients' content as well. And we have found them to be really, really great for engagement on Instagram. Now, I think this has something to do with how well they lend themselves to storytelling. Now, stories sell. This has been a mantra in marketing for a very long time, and I've definitely found it to be true. Now, I remember when I was at Repurpose Summit last year in 2019, and Phil Jones, one of the fellow speakers, he said something that really stood out to me. He said, "Facts tell and stories sell." And I think that's really, really true. All of my best performing emails, podcast episodes, social posts are the ones that are built on some kind of great storytelling. It lends itself to tapping into people's emotions, creating tension and excitement. And I think it just goes a lot deeper than a simple explanation of what something is or why people should be interested. And carousel posts are really great because they can enable storytelling on Instagram. Now, Social Insider analysed over 7 million Instagram posts, and they found that carousel posts on average have a higher engagement rate than both image and video posts. And that counts for profiles of almost all sizes. And this research that Social Insider did was really, really interesting, actually. So I'm going to share a link to the research in the blog post for this week's podcast episode. Now, I think everyone can benefit from including more carousels in their Instagram feed. They're a really exciting format because they're so flexible and they allow for a lot of creativity, and you can incorporate repurposing into creating the carousels, which is a key reason why I wanted to share this with you all. Before we go any further, it's worth me just clarifying that whilst I'm talking about Instagram carousels here, you can create carousel posts on other social sites as well. I think they're maybe not quite as intuitive and not quite as effective because you can use them on Facebook and LinkedIn, but they don't appear in the same engaging way that a carousel appears on Instagram. Usually the first 3 or 4 images are displayed in a grid, so it kind of takes away from the swiping carousel, which works so well on Instagram, but you can still do carousel posts on other social platforms. So I'm talking about Instagram, but you can create carousels for other platforms. Just as an example of what I mean by a carousel post. So we did some storytelling with episode 133 of the Content 10X podcast called Content Repurposing, Customer Journey from Mobile to Long Form to Buying. And it was very much a story. So we took you from the idea of people finding you on their mobile device first, short form content, and then that journey that they go on with your content to become a superfan. And for the carousel, we created a character and we showed them in this story that we turned into images and created the carousel on Instagram, and it worked really, really well. I'll link to it in the show notes, or just head on over to our Instagram account at Content10X. We also created a carousel to promote our toolkit. So again, for a very different purpose now, we created a combination of video testimonials and short copy, product imagery, and that all got turned into one carousel. So there's lots of different ways that you can use them. It was very effective in that sense because we combined videos and testimonials and then copy to create the carousel. There's so many other ways that businesses out there are making great use of this type of post. And again, you can be very, very creative. So I mentioned Phil Jones earlier, who spoke at Repurpose Summit when I did in 2019, and his saying, so facts tell and stories sell. Now, he is very, very good at telling stories. And unsurprisingly, he's great at carousel posts on Instagram. So Phil really inspired me to look into carousel posts further. He shares these big ideas that would somehow, I think, lose their impact if they were wrote in a caption. He's really good at keeping his carousels engaging and on brand and interesting and quite hard hitting as well, actually. And he's a master of not saying words that don't need to be said. So it's amazing how much can be communicated in one of Phil Jones's carousels. So just go over and have a look at his Instagram. It's Phil Jones UK. Another example is a company called Bamboo Clothing. On Instagram, it's bamboo_clothing. And they use carousels really effectively in their feed. Usually they share pictures of people wearing their clothes, which of course makes sense. But when they want to share some more detailed information, they also use carousels to share things like graphics. Another example is a company called Bamboo Clothing. On Instagram, it's bamboo_clothing. And they use carousels really effectively in their Instagram feed. Now, usually they share pictures of people wearing their clothes, which of course makes sense. But when they want to share some more detailed information, they use carousels and share essentially graphics, really. Now, this way they turn a pretty big chunk of text into really visually appealing images that are easy to scroll through and really beautiful to look at. And it's such a smart way of introducing a different style and visual to their feed, but staying very much on brand and engaging. So go check them out as well. So that is bamboo_clothing. I just love to see companies respect how important the visual appeal of Instagram and carousels can be. And I guess what I'm trying to explain here is that there are hundreds of different ways that you can repurpose your content into carousels, and they will engage and excite people in different ways. Here are a few ideas that you could try if you're interested in creating carousels and you want to repurpose content into an Instagram carousel. Number one is to outline your longer form content by simplifying the message and really breaking it down and creating a summary in 10 images or videos that you can use 10 images or less. And if you do it right, people will be really keen to read the full thing. So I mentioned Phil Jones is great at this, so go check him out because that's exactly what he does. So this is about breaking down a longer form piece of content, a blog post or a video or a podcast episode, into something that can be communicated in 10 simple images or videos or less. Number two is to tease your longer content. So this is where you provide a certain amount of information in the carousel and then a call to action to get people to go onto your website to find out more. So let's say you had a 10-step process to baking amazing cakes. You could show 5 or 6 steps and then use the final image in the carousel to tell people where to go to get the final steps. So, it's just a bit of a tease where people will get value from the first steps, but if they want to go and get more, they're going to head on over to your website. Hey, just a little break from this podcast episode to ask you a question. Would you like one single place that you can go to that provides you with everything you need to be able to implement the best practices in content repurposing for your video content, your podcast episodes, and your social media content today? To help you get more value from the content that you create, get more time back, and help you reach more people than you ever thought possible. If so, then you are going to love the Content 10x Toolkit. The toolkit is full of video tutorials, templates, checklists, swipe files, step-by-step guides, and more that shows you how to repurpose your content in the best ways possible today. No more Googling, no more figuring it out yourself. We provide you with everything that you need to become a content repurposing pro. If this sounds like something that would interest you, then go check out the Content 10x Toolkit at content10x.com/toolkit. Okay, and back to this week's episode. Number 3 is about sharing more standalone content from your longer content. So what I mean here is if your longer content is making several points, let's say you could share one of them in full in your carousel, giving people a really great taste of what your podcast or your video or your blog post is about. But then that's just sharing one of the 10 points. And then if they want to see what the rest of it is about, then they need to head on over to the core content. So I guess it's somewhat of a tease in that you are breaking down one part of your longer form content, but instead of sharing only part of a process and asking people to go somewhere else to get the rest, what you're doing here is kind of just fully sharing one part of your blog post, podcast, or video, and it stands alone as great content on its own. But just to let people know that there's more about this topic in your longer form video or podcast or blog post. Number 4 is more about explaining a problem. So not necessarily focusing on the solution as such. So let's say your longer form content is a blog post or podcast episode or video about a particular problem, and you are helping people and providing the solution. Then maybe your carousel post could just focus on the problem definition, the problem statement, and helping people to understand that perhaps they have this problem, and that get them to have that kind of aha moment where they think, this is me. So you create this great carousel that provides this aha moment and they completely relate to it. And then you let people know where to go to consume the rest of the content, which will help them with the solution. So here the carousel focuses on the problem, and that's how we then direct people to that longer form content to find the solution. So there are some ways that you can repurpose content into carousels. Now, if you want to create great Instagram carousels, there are a few rules of best practice that I think you should consider. So firstly, whilst you can post up to 10 images or videos, that doesn't mean that you have to. So don't try and stretch your point out to 10 images or videos if it can be done in 5, because communication is always about simplicity. So design your first image so people can't help but swipe to see the next one. Tap into people's natural curiosity with that first image. Lead with a question, tease the ending, give them a great reason to start swiping through your carousel, and make it obvious that they need to swipe as well. It needs to be clear that it's not just a static image. That actually comes on to my next point, which is making sure that each image leads on to the next one. Make it essential for your audience to see every image to get to the point. I like to do lots of ... so people know that there's more to come. I like to split a sentence up and that kind of thing. So half a sentence on one image and half a sentence on the next. So they have to scroll through the carousel. So make it really obvious that the images lead onto each other. Make use of different media types as well. You can combine pictures and videos, and a video at the right time can really help the pacing and storytelling of your carousel. So just think about that, whether it would be appropriate to throw in a video or make the entire carousel video content or make the entire carousel images. Use the same colors, fonts, and styles in all of your images, so the carousel really neatly and congruently flows together. It should look like one consistent piece of content, not a bunch of random images or videos thrown together. So be really creative. Don't just rewrite your podcast script or your blog posts in pictures. Be smarter, focus on the fact that it's visual medium, take pictures of yourself and incorporate this, and graphics too. So play around with the format of having to swipe to see the next image and just have some fun with it. And lastly, don't overwrite with your images and your captions as well. So use text sparingly. Your images need to be easy to read, clear, and not overwhelming. And your caption shouldn't be stealing focus from the carousel, because the carousel is the main event. And I just want to leave you with some examples of what you could do for different types of content. So say you have a podcast, maybe share some of the best tips or questions from each episode and encourage people to listen to hear the rest. For example, for this episode of the Content 10X podcast, we're going to create a carousel that visualizes some of the best practice tips we've shared. And the final slide will let people know that there's even more great advice in this podcast episode, and let them know that there is more. So maybe there's more case study references, more examples, and so on. If you have a video show, then it's a great idea to incorporate some of your highlights into a carousel, but rather than just posting a clip of a great point that you made, you could create an image that teases the topic that you're talking about. So think of the first image like a YouTube thumbnail. For example, if your carousel is going to share clips on how to create Instagram carousels, you could start with an image that says, swipe to find out how I create Instagram carousels to grow engagement. Make it look very much like the YouTube style of thumbnails, really, really stand out, because you want to get people to swipe. And if you have a blog, if you do blog posts, then summarize your key points by following some of the best practice advice for distilling long form content down. Don't just copy and paste a paragraph into tiny font and put that into a carousel image. Instead, be really smart about picking out important sentences and their power words and really distill the blog post down into short form content. So to summarize, I think carousels can provide an amazing way to grab people's attention, to share a deep look at your content without them having to consume the full piece straight away, and to experiment with creativity and reinforce your branding as well. So I hope you've liked this week's episode of the Content 10X podcast. And if you are on Instagram, I hope I've inspired you to think about creating carousel posts and inspired you to consider that you could repurpose some of your existing content into a carousel. If you haven't got a copy yet, then please do consider getting a copy of my book, Content 10X. More content, less time, maximum results. You can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble site, or just head to content10x.com/book. And there's lots of links and ways that you can purchase the book there. It's available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook as well. And it really is the ultimate guide to repurposing every type of content. Also, please do give me a follow on social media. I'm at Content10X on all the social media platforms, and I'm most active on LinkedIn and Instagram. Okay, so all that's left to say is thank you so much for listening to this week's podcast episode, and I will catch you in the next one.